No, thank you. I'm actually here mostly for the Q&A. My main purpose here was to answer your questions about the ethics board. I just had a few notes on the screen. They weren't really essential. If the screens eventually come back up, we're good. As you could see from the, as you could basically see from your handouts, it was called Keeping It Ethical. Various controversies. That title came about because Joe, when Joe asked me to come up with a title, he said, make it really interesting. People will stay awake for ethics if it's really interesting. So I did my best. I decided to focus on some of the controversies. The first question, of course, is what is the BCIT Research Ethics Board? We are basically an elected volunteer group of researchers at BCIT. Use this, okay. How's this going? Can you hear me? Okay. I don't know, it doesn't sound that different to me. So I'll use this one here. This one's cranked up. So anyway, we're an elected volunteer group of researchers at BCIT. Faculty, staff, we don't include any management. I'll get into that later. That's kind of part of our guidelines. We are tasked with taking a look at basically every human study that our faculty, staff, students do at BCIT. Any outside researchers who come in who want to study you, to study our faculty, staff, or students. Anyone who wants to study biological materials, so specimens, that sort of thing, that's also considered human research. So those are kind of the three main categories where research has to come to us. Unfortunately, many people don't necessarily realize that they're doing human research. So there's a lot of outreach that I have to do, go to various programs and talk to them and kind of initiate them and what defines human research, what makes a human participant. Some of the interesting things that have come up have been things like devices in some programs. They'll take a device from someone, they'll start playing with it, they'll forget that that came from someone and that their privacy needs to be respected. And so that actually constitutes human research. Even though they're studying a device, they may be studying the device that came from a human participant. So that's the kind of thing that we look at. The guidelines that we're mandated with taking a look at, I should mention that our Tri-Council funding, so we get some NSERC funds, some SHRC funds. I don't know that we have any CIHR funds yet, but those come with the stipulation that we have an ethics board to review any research that involves humans. And so, yeah, we do get a mix of outside researchers wanting to study us, internal researchers wanting to study us, as well as others outside of BCIT. We get quite a mix of applications and students who want to do research for their classes. And the policy that we're fixed to is this huge policy. If you were to print it out, go online, 220 pages, about 13 chapters covering various parts of ethics, including indigenous research, clinical trials, and I'm trying to remember all of the chapters. I don't have them memorized, but I've spent the last few years doing it. So yeah, it's a very big policy. And you can learn all about it going to the Tri-Council website. You can just Google TCPS2 Core. You'll come up with a great course that you can take. We have all of our students, faculty, staff taking this course. In fact, I went to look at the statistics. Maybe I digress a bit, but we have about, strangely, 300 people a year taking that online course who are tagged to BCIT. For comparison, we only get about 45 applications a year at the ethics board. So what those 300 or so people are doing, I'm not quite sure. Maybe they're just learning about ethics. Maybe it was a course assignment, something like that. But we have quite a few people learning about ethics at BCIT and taking that online course. Who are the Research Ethics Board? As I mentioned, faculty, staff, and we're elected, basically self-elected. I came to my position on the board in 2012 when someone from my department was asked to join. They were looking for new members. She declined. She said she was too busy with research. I had an interest in ethics from my background in clinical research, working in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry. So I had that. Well, you don't necessarily think of big multinationals as ethical, but it is a great way to foster ethics when you work in that industry. So I came to work on the ethics board, eventually becoming chair when our previous chair, Kathy Quee, stepped down. And it was a great learning experience. The other board members come from various schools. We have some other members from School of Computing and Academic Studies. We have some members from School of Business, members from School of Energy, a bunch of members from School of Health. I'm trying to think, applied research. We usually try and at least get one person from applied research. Any of you from applied research want to join? We're always looking for people from applied research. And institutional research as well runs a lot of surveys, so we like to have someone come from there. So we try and be a fairly broad-based representative group, and actually that's spelled out in TCPS2. We have to have a certain number of members who are knowledgeable in ethics, knowledgeable in law, and then represent all the different scientific fields of the research that we study. So right now, the count that I've got here is about 15 members. We have an administrator, Jenna Clues, you met her at the back, coming from applied research. So that makes up our 15-member board so far. So the essential information, for those of you who might fall asleep during some of the details, if you want to learn more about ethics, just go on to Google, type in BCIT ethics. You'll come up with our website. We have a very nicely designed one-page website. You can thank Joe Boyd for that great design. It has all of our files posted, all of our hyperlinks to things like TCPS2 and the core course. If that doesn't answer your questions, if the fact that we've posted doesn't answer your questions, you can easily contact me, extension 6917, or just email research_ethics at BCIT. That will be forwarded directly into my inbox. That took a bit of technical know-how to get that to work, but that will get to me. Interestingly, some researchers try and send it to both research_ethics and me. Then I get two copies, and I have to decide which one is the one that I should be looking at and which one should I delete. So yeah, please email one or the other, but they both get to me. So the core of what I wanted to talk to you about today, the bit that will keep you awake until lunchtime. That's right, I don't have a timer here, do I? You've got the clock behind me. Wave your hands when it gets close to lunch. There were basically 9 major issues that I came up with, and then there was a 10th that I left off the list. What kind of keeps us up at night? What's controversial in ethics? What tends to come up at our board meetings? All of our board members say the best thing about being part of the Research Ethics Board is not really the work. I mean, the work is reading the applications and trying to decide if it was ethical or not. The real fun part is sitting around the table and talking about these thorny issues that come up, and being part of this very confidential discussion that involves many difficult, thorny issues that when people start butting up against each other. So yeah, if you want to be part of that, let me know. We're always looking for good members who are knowledgeable in various areas. But importantly, who are willing to do the work, review the applications. So what keeps us up at night? One of the top on the list is SurveyMonkey. All of you have probably answered SurveyMonkey surveys. The trouble is that SurveyMonkey is now, we used to have this great application in Canada. The servers were in Canada. Unfortunately, it got bought out by SurveyMonkey. So now essentially all of the major surveys that are run out of SurveyMonkey. The smaller providers no one's ever heard of. The unfortunate issue is that BC, I think Ontario, PEI, have this privacy law, this thing called privacy, where our personal information is not to leave Canada specifically. And unfortunately, SurveyMonkey servers are sitting somewhere in the US. So when they bought the Canadian company that we used to use, we requested that they keep some Canadian servers. We now have a license that has those Canadian servers. It means you have to go to the LTC to access this institutional license with Canadian servers. So if you want to collect any personal information, that's email addresses, really kind of personal demographics that might identify you, obviously your name, that sort of thing, that has to be done through a Canadian server type survey. And we can help you, the LTC can help set that up for you. So yeah, we spend a lot of time looking at privacy matters, whether that data is going to be destroyed, when it would be destroyed, where it's kept, is it a locked file cabinet, are the files password protected, if that data is transmitted, is it go through encryption and that sort of thing. So that's what we spend a lot of our time analyzing. Another one is remuneration or compensation. You've probably done these surveys. You can enter to win a gift card, Starbucks, something like that. Usually those are okay, but where it starts to become a problem is if you start paying people honoraria, the cash starts to increase. If it gets too high, that can be considered coercive, depending on the population. So if you're studying people on the downtown east side, if you're studying students who are eating nothing but Kraft dinner, if you start cranking those numbers up to $100, $200, that becomes potentially a little bit coercive. They may just do the research because they need the money. They need to buy, a few more packages of Kraft dinner. So yeah, we have to watch out for that. We have to make sure that everything is equitable. If you involve people from different walks of life, say executives, and then you involve workers, you have to compensate the same if you are going to have them do the same thing, sit in a room and answer the same set of questions. So it has to be equitable, even though it may be harder to get that executive into the room. The optics are not quite right if you're having them do the same thing. So that's something that we have to look at. Collecting demographics, another major issue. Almost every survey that crosses my desk, unfortunately, has these demographics at the top. Some of them can be a little bit invasive. Sharing your family income is usually okay, but some people don't like to share it. But when you start to get into things like sex and gender, it gets a bit messy. Do you mean biological sex? Do you mean gender identity? Are you inclusive? Do you cover the non-binary? So that sort of thing. Almost everyone just has male, female on their surveys. We have to turn them back around, say, put in another box, make people welcome, feel inclusive, that sort of thing. So that's one of the ones that keeps on coming up over and over and over again. Age of consent for research, another big one. Many people kind of look at the literature, they say, oh, well, everyone else has recruited people between the ages of 19 and 50. So that's what I'm going to do. Unfortunately, that's not really nice. You happen to be 18, you're living on your own. Why can't you participate? You happen to be 51. Why are you being cut out of the study? So TCPS directs us to have researchers enroll anyone regardless of age. It gets a bit dicey when you get into kids because they can't necessarily easily consent for themselves. Then you have to get a parent involved. But in that range between, say, 15 to 19, where you're below the age of majority for BC, you can still actually participate in research. There are no laws that say that you can't participate in research if you can understand the consent form and adequately consent. Kids can participate. Of course, notifying parents is really, really good politics, really, really good business. So you really have to justify not notifying parents, not having parents consent. There are cases in research where parents might get in the way of research. They may not consent to their kids answering some of those questions. The ethics board has to evaluate that and weigh the benefits versus the risks. How am I doing for time? Conflict of interest, another big one that comes up. And part of this is also a bit of power over that I should mention. So in conflict of interest, you've developed a great technology, you want to commercialize it. It's important that you tell the participants that you are the person commercializing it. They need to know that you stand to profit from it. They have to consent that their participation is being part of this potentially commercial venture. They may or may not be compensated for it, but they need to know and they need to sign off on the consent form. And likewise, we need to know whether you may be in potential conflict. You may want to make the results look better than they actually are. And that's something that we need to be aware of as well. So yeah, that has to go on the consent form as well. Excuse me. Each of these things go on the consent form. The consent form can be rather long. We have to very carefully kind of balance how it's worded, the headings, whether it's easy to read, but make sure that every participant is adequately warned of the sort of things that they're getting into. The next one on the list was student research. If any of you are students doing research, in your classes especially, it's important to know that Microphone? Okay, great. It's important to let them know that that they are doing research, that they should apply through the ethics board. We unfortunately will come across from time to time students doing research. They'll post a survey on the web. We'll see it accidentally. We'll discover that they should have gone through the ethics board. So important to get the word out to fellow faculty members, students doing research and surveying people, doing interviews with people, that sort of thing. That could potentially cross over into research. Give us a call. We'll let you know if it crosses the boundary into research. Best to have a really good consent form. Even if you're not necessarily crossing that line, it's important to have people consent properly. So yeah, student research is research. Especially when it leaves the classroom. And many capstone projects are presented publicly. So yeah, those are basically research. Harmonization, you may not want to apply to the ethics board, BCIT ethics board, because you have approval through UBC or SFU. That's also a big no-no. We need to find out what our faculty members are doing, especially if they're doing them on campus involving our students. And we have a harmonization process in place. It's beginning to get better. 1 minute? Okay, great. We're almost done here. So you can actually forward your UBC application, SFU application to us. We'll take a look at it. You only need to write one application. It's a pretty good system, so don't worry about multiple applications. Critical research and management interference. This is the last topic here. A very interesting topic and one that we spend a lot of time discussing on the board. So it turns out, as faculty members and students, you have, well, I'd say I'm not sure about students, but at least faculty members have something called basically, here, let's jump ahead here. So faculty members and staff, I think, may be covered under what's called academic freedom. We can study what we want to, even potentially if other people don't want us to. And from time to time, I'll get a call from someone in management, or I'll discover from the researcher that someone has tried to shut down their research project. So it's one of the reasons that our ethics board is made up of faculty and staff. We don't include any management in our ethics board because they could potentially be in conflict of interest on some research projects. So yeah, it's very important to allow for critical research. People have the right, people actually have the right to study us without our consent, but it's important to let the participants know that they are engaging in critical research and there could be repercussions. So anyway, that's it. That's the basic introduction. Here, I'll try and stay close to the microphone. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Now you know how to get hold of me, extension 6917. I'm easy to find. What sort of questions do you have about ethics? Anything? Sure.
Global data about the without having, you are okay to include that data in the search without having the participants consent, right to consent. However, if you survey the students or if you interview the students, that's a different story. But I want to know if this is correct, if we can use like numerical data about, we extract from our courses in research without consent.
Yeah, that's a very good question. What can you actually collect without consent? There are a few, basically a few exemptions under TCPS2, and education research is one of those gray areas, and very, very gray area with education research. So definitely, if you are doing education research, contact the board before you start analyzing any data. And yeah, unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer for, anyway, for using student grades. It depends on what you're using them for, if you're going for marks.
What would a typical turnaround time be from application?
We give our reviewers 10 business days to review an application. So the turnaround time generally is kind of on average about 3 weeks. If you send it to me, I take a look at it, make sure we have everything, send it to the reviewers. They have 10 business days. They give the comments back to me, and then I review them and give them back to you. So yeah, turnaround time is roughly in the scale of about 3 weeks. But that depends on how quickly you can make those revisions and get it back to me. But that's the turnaround. Faster than some boards. Question?
Yeah, so you mentioned survey monkey, which is like transparency across most collecting data. What are the types of modifications you have?
Where are the servers located? Yes. So yeah, that's the important thing, is to discover where the tool is hosted. If it's a Canadian tool and it uses Canadian servers, you're fine. If you're not collecting any personal data, so no names, if it's entirely anonymous, no IP tracking, and all of those technological issues, then you can use any tool you want. But yeah, if you do want to do a prize draw, collect an email address, that sort of thing, or contact them later for an interview, and it will be confidential but not anonymous, then you need a Canadian server. So.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off there, Allison.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much for a great presentation.